My parents called me a failure with no future. When I said I'm leaving, I just hugged them and closed the door. 2 months later, they begged me to come back after They say some goodbyes are heavy. Mine was silent. When I told my parents I was leaving to pursue the one dream I hadn't let die, launching my own design studio, they didn't even pretend to be surprised. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, with that same smirk he wore when I brought home a B instead of an A. You've never finished anything in your life, he said. My mom didn't look up from her crossword. You're a failure with no future, she muttered, like it was a fact as obvious as the weather. That was the moment I knew nothing I ever did would be enough for them. I didn't argue. I just walked over to them and gave each of them a hug. The kind you give people you'll never see the same way again. Either of them returned it. They just sat there, stiff and unmoved. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I grabbed my duffel bag, walked out the front door of the house I grew up in, and didn't look back. I had $326 in my checking account, a used laptop with a cracked screen, and a portfolio that only existed in my head. But I also had something I never had in that house: belief in myself. And that was the first sign of trouble, for them. The first week on my own was brutal. I slept on an air mattress in a friend's spare room that reeked of cat litter and ramen noodles. I worked a temp job during the day, inputting warehouse inventory into a system older than I was, and sketched logos and branding ideas at night. My back hurt, my bank balance flirted with zero, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father smirk. "You'll be back in a week," he had said. That sentence became my fuel. By the second week, I had a logo of my own, a name, Redshift Studio, and one client. A local coffee shop that had seen my designs on Instagram and asked if I could make them a new menu board. I charged them $75. They paid me in cash and gave me 3 free lattes. That shouldn't have meant much, but it was the first time I'd ever been paid for something I created, not something I survived. I stayed up all night tweaking the layout, experimenting with fonts, colors, textures. When they installed it, the owner posted a picture online. Within 24 hours, 3 more small businesses messaged me. 2 days after that, someone tagged me in a local entrepreneur group on Facebook. And then, out of nowhere, a marketing agency reached out. They had a last-minute pitch for a tech startup and wanted a freelance designer to mock up a concept. One shot. $200. I poured everything I had into that project. The pitch won. The startup loved the design so much, they asked if I'd like to do the entire brand package. That was the moment the air shifted. I got a website live. I stopped needing the temp job. I started getting referrals, real clients, real money. Within 5 weeks, I had moved out of the spare room and into a studio apartment with nothing but a mattress, a desk, and my laptop. No couch, no TV, but it felt like a palace. I stood in that empty space with my first official contract in hand, and for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. And that's when the text started. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was knee-deep in a client's visual rebrand when my phone buzzed. "Dad, can you talk?" Then, "Mom, we're worried about you. Please come by for dinner sometime." Then, "Dad again. Saw your work online. Nice stuff. Let's talk." It was surreal. They didn't ask if I was okay when I left. Didn't call to see if I had a roof over my head. Now, 2 months later, they were acting like they just misplaced me temporarily, like I'd wandered off and they were graciously offering me a path home. I didn't reply. That night I got a call. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then 10 more. Then, finally, a message from my mom that said, "We're sorry. Please, come back home. We need to talk." They weren't worried. They were afraid. Because people were noticing me now. Friends of theirs had seen my work. My name was getting mentioned. I had crossed that invisible line between trying and arriving. And suddenly, their disapproval turned into desperation. They wanted a seat at the table they never believed I could build. But I had a plan. I waited until I could do it right. Not out of pettiness, Though let's be honest, that was part of it, but because I wanted to show up on my own terms, with no apologies left in me. So I planned a visit. 2 months and 6 days after I walked out that door, I pulled up in a rental car I could finally afford. Not flashy. Clean, sleek, mine. I wore a blazer I thrifted and tailored myself, carried a slim laptop bag with client folders inside, and walked up to that house like I was walking into a meeting. When my mother opened the door, her eyes flit down to the bag, the shoes, the watch, an old Casio, but polished. Her face froze somewhere between relief and confusion. "You came," she said, as if I were a long-lost soldier returning from war. "I said I would," I replied. "Eventually." My father was in the living room, pretending to read the newspaper. He didn't stand up. Didn't even take off his glasses. Just mumbled, "Hey, son," like nothing had happened. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place they had once told me I was a failure. My mom had cooked something elaborate, roast, potatoes, even those little rolls I used to love as a kid. She smiled too much. My dad stayed quiet. And then she said it. "We've been thinking, it might be nice if you moved back in. Just for a little while. You could save money, maybe help us with a few things. Your father's been having some health stuff, and we were hoping you could take a look at the bills. You're doing so well now." That's when I smiled. Cold, measured, slow. "You didn't ask me how I got here," I said. "You didn't ask what I've been through these last 8 weeks. You just want to skip ahead to the part where I'm successful, and you get to say you supported me." My father finally looked up, jaw tight. "That's not fair." "No," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my bag. "This is fair." I laid it on the table. It was a list, every dollar I had sent them over the last 5 years. Rent. Groceries. Utilities. Random cash when they said they were short. $14,632 total. "Since we're talking about fairness," I said, "I'd like to know how you plan to pay me back." My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father's face turned a shade darker. "This isn't how family works," he said. "No," I said. "It's how respect works. And you cashed out on that a long time ago." I stood up. "I'm not your failure anymore. And I'm not your safety net either." I walked to the door and paused, just long enough for it to sting. "You had your chance. And you blew it." Then I left. The house didn't follow me this time. No shouting from the doorway, no footsteps behind me, no last-minute apologies. Just the sound of the front door clicking shut. It was funny in a way. The same door that once felt like a barrier now felt like closure. I got in the car and didn't look back. Not because I was being dramatic, but because there was nothing left to see. That night, I turned off my phone and sat alone in my apartment, the same one they said I couldn't afford, surrounded by sketches and notes and coffee-stained notebooks full of ideas that were once called a waste of time. I listened to the silence, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The next morning, I woke up to 14 missed calls. 8 from my mom. 4 from my dad. 2 from an unknown number, probably my aunt or someone they recruited to talk sense into me. I didn't answer. I didn't call back. But I did open the last voicemail they left. It was my father's voice, low and strained. "I don't know what you think this proves. We were just trying to help you. We've always supported you in our way. You don't just turn your back on family." I replayed it once, then deleted it. Because here's the truth, they never supported me. Not really. They tolerated me when I was quiet, when I played along, when I paid the bills and smiled through the insults. But the second I stepped into my own light, they tried to drag me back into their shadow. And now they were the ones being left behind. I spent the rest of the week finishing a branding campaign for a mid-sized tech startup that was launching in 3 cities. They wanted billboards, ads, a full visual identity. I charged them more than I made in 3 months at my old job, and they didn't blink. My designs were going live in Times Square. Not metaphorically. Literally. And that's when the news broke. A local business article covered the campaign. My name was in the byline. The feature image was one of my designs, a minimalist, bold splash of red and white, and the write-up included a small paragraph about Redshift Studio and the young designer from modest beginnings who had found a way to stand out in a saturated market. Modest beginnings. That was one way to put it. The article went semi-viral. Not millions of views, but enough. Old classmates shared it. Former coworkers sent me congratulatory messages. Even a teacher from high school emailed me. I always knew you had it in you. He didn't, by the way. He once told me to focus on accounting. And then, one day later, I got a message I never expected. It was from my mother. It was a long one, longer than any message she'd sent in years. I stared at my phone for a full minute before opening it. Her name felt foreign now, like the contact info belonged to someone I used to know. It started like this. We're sorry. I'm sorry. Your father and I didn't mean what we said that day. We were scared you'd fail and hate us for encouraging you. We didn't know how to be supportive. We thought being tough on you would make you stronger. I scrolled slowly, each word like a pebble tossed into a dry well. We're proud of you now. We've been showing everyone the article. Your dad even printed it out. We tell people you're a business owner, a creative genius, that you made something out of nothing. Can we please talk? I stopped there. Not because it hurt. It didn't. It was hollow. Like hearing applause from people who never clapped when it mattered. They were proud now, when it was safe to be. When there was press, money, recognition. When success meant they could finally brag without looking like liars. But where was that pride when I was 16, sketching logos in the margins of my homework? When I skipped meals to buy design software? When I slept on that deflated air mattress praying one client would say yes? They weren't proud of me. They were proud of the story I had become. And they wanted a piece of it. I didn't respond. Instead, I did something small, but deliberate. I changed the contact name from Mom to Margaret. Not out of spite, just clarity. If we were starting over, we'd do it without illusions. That weekend I spoke at a design conference. They gave me a lanyard with my name in bold. Evan Wilder, founder, Redshift Studio. I stood on stage under bright lights, talking about self-worth, branding, and how to stand tall even when no one else sees your value. I didn't mention my parents. Not once. Afterward, a young designer came up to me. Maybe 19, with ink-stained fingers and that hopeful panic in his eyes. How do you keep going when no one believes in you? He asked. I thought for a moment. Then I said, you stop trying to make them believe. You believe enough for both of you. And when the day comes that they finally look up and see what you've built, you smile, thank them for the doubt, and keep walking. Because by then, you won't need them to follow. 2 weeks passed. I figured they'd take the hint. Margaret stopped texting. My dad, still saved in my phone as just Rick, went quiet too. I thought maybe that was it. A quiet collapse, the kind that doesn't make a sound but leaves you lighter. Then the envelope came. Cream-colored. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in perfect cursive. For a second I thought it was from a client, maybe a wedding planner or boutique. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was an invitation. To celebrate our son's recent success and growing business, please join us for a small family dinner in honor of Evan Wilder. Sunday, 6 p.m. Formal. I read it 3 times. There was no way to misinterpret it. They were throwing me a dinner. For me. And they hadn't even bothered to ask if I'd come. I didn't know what stung more, the assumption that I'd show up or the fact that, for the first time in my life, I was a reason they wanted to gather. I wasn't the extra chair. I was the centerpiece. At first, I threw the invitation in the trash. But that night, while brushing my teeth, I kept seeing it. That sentence. To celebrate our son's success. Their son. Their success. They had spent 25 years calling me invisible. Now they wanted to use me as a trophy. parade me around like I had been carved from their guidance, like my grit had grown in their soil. And that's when I decided I'd go. Not for them. For me. Not to reconcile, not to heal some broken bridge. I wanted them to see, up close, what they lost when they bet against me. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't gloat. I'd let the room do it for me. I arrived 5 minutes early. Not out of nerves, but strategy. I wanted to see the room before the performance began. Their house looked the same. Brick exterior, faded porch swing, that stubborn crack on the sidewalk I used to trip over as a kid. But inside, it was dressed up. Linen tablecloths. Wine glasses set like they just raided a wedding registry. Even a centerpiece of white roses, the kind Margaret always said were too expensive for home. There were guests. Not many, just family. My cousin Jared, who once told me art school was a waste. Aunt Carol, who hadn't spoken to me in years. My sister Meredith, in a designer blouse she never wore for Thanksgiving. They all turned when I walked in. Some smiled politely. Others nodded like they'd just seen a ghost that owed them money. And then Margaret appeared from the kitchen, apron crisp, eyes wide. "Evan," she said, breathless. "You made it." I smiled, calm and clean. Of course. I wouldn't miss my own tribute. My father came around the corner, still wearing that half-grin he used when talking to clients he didn't like. "Look at you. All grown up." No apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd said to me the day I left. We sat. They toasted. My mother said a few words, fumbling through something about how proud they were, how they always knew I'd find my way. I raised an eyebrow at that but didn't interrupt. And then my father added, "And we're just grateful Evan remembered where he came from." That was it. The match. I stood slowly. Every eye in the room locked on me. "I didn't come here for compliments," I said. "Or your approval. I came because I wanted you to see the version of me you never bothered to believe in. The one who didn't need your encouragement, your money, or your love with strings attached." Silence. Aunt Carol shifted in her seat. "I made it," I continued. "Not because of this family, but in spite of it." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I walked over to the table and placed it next to my father's wine glass. He looked down. His name was on it. "That's the total," I said. "Every dollar I gave you over the years. Adjusted for inflation even. You won't be getting another cent." Then I turned to my mother. "And you, don't call me unless you're ready to talk to me like a person. Not a resource. Not a disappointment. Not a project. Just Evan." I walked to the door, grabbed my coat. "I'm not your failure anymore," I said, pausing only for a moment. "And you? You're not invited to what comes next." I left the house behind without a glance back. Let them sit in that silence. The text started before I even reached my apartment. First from my mother, long, winding messages peppered with half apologies and confused questions. "Why would you humiliate us like that? We were just trying to show we care. You didn't have to make a scene." Then my father. His message was short. I read it 3 times, just to feel how hollow it was. "You burned a bridge that didn't need to be burned." I didn't reply. That night, I ordered Thai takeout and watched the rain tap against the window. The silence in my apartment was golden. No shame hanging from the ceiling, no tight-lipped silence at dinner, no weight pressing against my ribs every time I said something that didn't meet their expectations. I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke up to a notification. Redshift Studio featured in Forbes' 5 Young Creatives to Watch. I blinked. Forbes. I clicked the link. There it was, my name, my work, a short paragraph about my approach to design as storytelling, and a pull quote they'd taken from the conference. If they don't see your worth, build a spotlight they can't ignore. It was surreal. And beautiful. Because in that moment, the voices of the past got drowned out by something louder, my own. I didn't send the article to my parents. Didn't need to. I knew they'd see it. Probably forwarded by a neighbor. Or whispered about by a cousin. Or maybe they'd even print it out again, But this time, they'd know they weren't in the story. Not this one. A week passed. No more texts. No calls. Just quiet. Which, for a while, I thought meant it was over, that they'd finally understood what I'd said, even if they didn't like it. Then came the knock. It was a rainy Thursday morning, the kind of soft gray day where everything feels muted. I was in sweatpants, halfway through editing a pitch deck, when I heard the knock again. Firm. Measured. When I opened the door, there they were. Margaret and Rick, standing side by side, like statues trying to look warm. My father in a pressed button-down that still smelled faintly of cigars, my mother holding a zippered leather binder, the kind you only bring when something needs proving. "Hi," she said softly, eyes scanning the apartment behind me. "We just want to talk." I didn't move. I didn't say a word. Just watched them, letting the pause hang heavy. "We don't expect anything," Rick added quickly. "We're not here to ask for money. Or favors." He said it like a man reading a script someone else had written for him. Margaret stepped forward. "It's just, we saw the Forbes piece. And we realized there's a lot we never asked you. About how you got here. About what it took." She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Just less certain. Less rehearsed. I crossed my arms. "So now you're interested." Her lip trembled just once. "I guess we were afraid to see you clearly," she said. "Because if we did, we'd have to admit how wrong we were." There was a silence so wide, I could have walked around in it. Rick cleared his throat. "We didn't come to beg. We came to say." His voice caught, and for the first time in my life, I saw his face falter. "You were never the failure." The words landed like bricks. Not because I believed them, but because I didn't need them anymore. I opened the door wider, not to let them in, but to let them see. The apartment wasn't grand, but it was mine. Whiteboards lined with ideas. Shelves full of design books and awards. A corkboard with old sketches, including the very first menu I ever made, the $75 coffee shop project. "This," I said, gesturing around me, "is what happened when I stopped needing your approval." Margaret nodded, her eyes misty. Rick looked away. "I'm glad you came," I said honestly. "But I'm not opening that door again. Not all the way. I'm not your comeback story. I'm not your redemption arc." I stepped back, holding the door open just enough. "You're welcome to watch from the outside. But that's where you'll stay." They didn't argue. They didn't cry. They just stood there, the rain starting to darken Rick's collar. "Okay," Margaret whispered. "Take care, Evan," Rick said, his voice flat but quieter than before. I closed the door behind them. Not with anger. Not with triumph. With peace. And for the first time, I truly knew this wasn't revenge. It was justice. I didn't hear from them again, not really. A birthday card arrived 6 months later, unsigned. An email from my father, years later, with a link to one of my interviews and nothing else. I didn't reply. Because I didn't need to. Success, it turns out, isn't loud. It's quiet. It's mornings with coffee and purpose. It's clients who trust you. It's building something from scratch and sleeping well at night because it's yours. And if anyone's listening, wondering if they should go, do it. Hug them. Close the door. And don't look back.